My first thought is the good news is they got through today without the finance minister resigning, which, as we all know, is not a given necessarily on update days anymore.
Spring economic update. Welcome back to Moose on the Loose. My name's David. Today we've got the budget numbers, the updates for this, what was supposed to be a fall economic update. We've got CBC pundits turning on Carney. We've got a story that got leaked. We even have a good news story in this one. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, we've got Sheree Teese posting this latest Janet Brown Alberta poll modeled out. The UPC +8 to 57 seats and the NDP -8 to 30 seats. This is coming off of this data here. 49% for the UPC and 36% for the NDP. Got this one here. King Charles gave a speech in America. I personally don't care about the royalty, the monarch, King Charles, the whole bit. But if you're interested in this, there's videos on YouTube of him giving a speech in the White House. We got this bombshell here. So Cosmin, Juno News posted this. I was leaked. A confidential Canadian Forces report reveals that a Quebec officer training platoon has 83% permanent residents. The program descended into ethnic infighting between West African fractions, lack of respect, in quotes, for women, and 48% grad rate. As Mario pointing out here, 83% non-citizens. Many had been in Canada less than 3 months. Less than half graduated. Platoon broke into ethnic infighting between African factions. For many candidates, it was the first time they ever lived with a member of the different gender. They didn't know how to respect women. This is the military Carney wants to rebuild with people who've been in Canada 90 days. What a disaster. Speaking of disaster, we have Carney's economic update here. So they're reducing it by $11.5 billion. It's still a massive $66 billion deficit, just not $78 billion.
There is this Canada Strong, Team Canada Strong, which is a whole initiative around apprenticeship and training. And in terms of creating skills trade people, it's a very focused approach. So that's kind of interesting. There's a huge sort of separate focus on community safety, including a new financial crimes group, which is sort of an interesting approach. One thing that's jumped out at me, it might seem small, but I guarantee people will jump on it, is a decrease in Canada Pension Plan contributions. It's deemed as sort of described actually as a way to keep money in the pockets of businesses and employees, and it will about $300 a year for somebody making $70,000, but it will be seen by some as undercutting our pension plan long-term, reduction in that rate from 9.9% to 9.5% starting in January. All of the things that are on the affordability side of the ledger have been kind of pre-announced, but the increase in that, what's now called the GST credit, that's now called the groceries credit, as of June will be permanent. It'll be a 25% increase for 5 years, and that will go into play. We do, of course, have the excise tax on gasoline removed, so that has to be accounted for here. Some of that
grocery rebate, as she said, permanent going forward 5 years, because they know they're not going to fix the economy. That's why that's there. He knows he's rolling out his net zero agenda. He's going to boost his Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1 value, and he's going to be tanking Canada in the process. Otherwise, they wouldn't budget that in for the next 5 years. That would be a one-time thing, 1 year, maybe 2 years max. You'd have that in the budget. Just saying. $55 billion costing are some of those new measures. Some of it are things that have been pre-announced. And I will say this, like many other budgets, as you know very well, it's very complicated to figure out what's new spending and what is spending being repeated. There's not a ton of new spending here, but there's some color around how the spending that they've put in place and some of their plans are playing out, including things like foreign direct investment. They're kind of tooting their horn on how well that is playing out so far, Vashi.
I thought one of the interesting things also is that they are looking at increased revenues because over the horizon, right? Not just the next year, but over the 5-year horizon because of the bigger, faster than anticipated growth, for example, relative to the projections in November and extra income tax revenue due to that. The reduction in the size of the deficit, though, ends after this year. So it's basically what they had projected in November for the years that follow. What does that tell you?
So they're not counting on it continuing. And I will say, actually, on their projections, it's worth noting that the out years are now seen to grow slightly more slowly than they thought last fall. And inflation is expected to be slightly more elevated than they thought last fall. So that it may be that
they're tanking our country. Like, let's just say it as it is. Carney is going to just spend, and that money will be flowing to everyone and anyone that isn't a Canadian, unless they're a well-connected insider or a CEO of Brookfield. Now, jumping over to this panel here, we got some spicy back and forth.
But like you, I'm sure, I hear from Canadians every day who do not feel that. And in particular, when the Prime Minister in the House of Commons, on 2 occasions that I can think of in the past few weeks, says affordability, it is the most affordable time for Canadians in the last decade. That rings particularly hollow. And there are a couple of reasons for that, though he keeps talking about how wages are outpacing inflation. I mean, if your wage goes up 3% this year, but you've seen a 30% increase in the price of food over the last 5 years, it doesn't feel like it gets you that far ahead. Sure, that's a...
But you get the grocery benefit. Like, let's get real. That grocery benefit only applies to about 1 in 4 Canadians. All of us have to pay for food. Kaboka squash is like $7 for a tiny little squash that used to cost like $2 max.
Certain income quintile, but it's not everybody. And in fact, as measured by Statistics Canada, the income inequality in this country was at a record level last year and a record level the year before. So and even the wage growth, right? For the highest income earners, they're going up 5% a year. For the lowest, it's 1.8%. There is nothing in what you table today to address that.
What I would say in terms of affordability measures, if you look at, again, we have taken $7 billion in new revenue. 66%, 68% is to address affordability. I'm with you when you say what people think when they wake up, many Canadians, is affordability, end of the week, end of the month. And that's why the pillar of the biggest pillar of affordability is housing, affordable homes. Because, people, that's usually the biggest portion of what you spend. We're taking generational approach to that. They say making sure that we have more affordable homes. That's the biggest
housing
pillar.
starts are forecast to go down this year.
Well, if you look at the price of rent and the price of homes, you see that there's easing of pressures even in the major urban centers. But we've been there with grocery. I mean, it might not be a lot for you.
It's in such a bad situation right now where you have housing prices have gone so high, but the wages aren't going up, the jobs are being lost. So even though the prices are coming down for sure in major areas, there's some areas where the housing prices are still very high, or there's lots of people fighting over a certain bracket of houses, but we're not getting new jobs. There isn't higher paying jobs coming in. There's not Build Canada Strong, exactly what they said they were going to do. This isn't happening. There is no Build Canada Strong. There isn't a booming economy where people can afford $800,000 houses unless you've built up a lot of equity in a house already. People coming out of school, like, they're completely screwed to the point where they should just go to America or another country, because there is no future for young Canadians in this country unless you want to move to somewhere where traditionally the housing prices have been so low, like under 100 grand, to the point now where it's like 300 grand for a house. Like some places in Alberta, you'll have those opportunities, like where they're building those data centers way out in the sticks. Examples like that. These guys know exactly what they're doing, and it's just all for themselves.
We look at the excess inflation on food, and we say we need to give a boost to people now.
I have to say, though, I had a gentleman write into my radio show today to text to say, how come I can't access that? I earn an okay income, but I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Like, my point is not that that's not a lot for people. It would still be a lot for
people.
Sure, but there are
40 million Canadians.
Yeah, there's still 25 more million people who feel like they're suffering, and you're telling them the IMF says we're doing okay.
Well, I would say, well, I mean, again, you can look at...
He's got nothing to say. The things that we don't think about is when food is so expensive, for example, bring up Kaboka squash. If you guys don't know what that is, this thing here. So I'm restricted on most foods I can eat. I can eat this thing. It tastes delicious and it's highly nutritious. And based on the different foods that we eat, the different colors in the food offer different nutrients, different vitamins. But if you restrict what people can afford, for example, this thing, which is bright and orange on the inside and green on the outside, has valuable nutrients versus, say, you buy a red cabbage, which anything that red is very valuable as well. And strawberries, blueberries. I mean, look at all the studies and research. We're not going to get into all that, but I mean, that's what I used to do on another channel. I used to dig in the same level of moose chart stuff into nutrition. When you're missing these colors of variety of foods in your diet because it's too expensive, we're going to have a health epidemic in this country where we'll have nutrient deficiencies and people developing diseases. I mean, we had that story come out whenever it was last year or 2 years ago about scurvy making a comeback because people couldn't afford oranges. It's the same thing. This is one problem after the other. We're going to have our healthcare overrun with people with scurvy or pick another disease because of nutrient deficiency, because people can't afford basic things like a squash that used to cost like $1.50, $2, and now it's like $7 or $8. He says, oh, there's a rebate. Well, it's like 1 in 4 people get the rebate. It's hardly any money. This is pathetic.
So sector and regions people are hurting, and that's why we said we're going to be there for them.
Okay, we're not going to listen to any more of this nonsense because this guy's a chronic liar. Now, we do have a good piece of news here. We're going to stick it right in the middle of the episode here. We've got Reclamaire posting this tonight in Buffalo, New York. The singer's microphone stopped working, and listen to them. The people of America here sang "O Canada" because the microphone wasn't working. And apparently, I haven't verified this, but just according to a bunch of comments, people saying that in Buffalo every single night, whether it's American and a Canadian team playing or just two American teams, which I believe this is what it was Buffalo versus Boston, they play both national anthems even if a Canadian team isn't in the building. And I believe that's just probably because of proximity to Canada. Listen to how beautiful this is. The American people singing our anthem when the microphone stops working.
And now the singing of "O Canada" and the Star Spangled Banner, performed tonight by Cammy Clooney.
Oh, Canada, our home and native, patriot love, with glowing, we sing the truth, strong and from far and wide, oh, and on God, glory.
Wow, it's incredible. I got goosebumps. Americans singing our national anthem. Mark Carney's trying to turn these people into the enemy. They are not the enemy. It's astonishing what Mark Carney has done to our country. Now, jumping over to CBC, listen to this. I mean, we've got multiple pundits turning on Carney. This stuff is starting to snowball.
This is an historic moment, Mr. Speaker. Generations will look back at this Prime Minister, this government, this Parliament to say that we have been there for them.
But the opposition says that doesn't stack up with reality.
This Liberal Prime Minister has now doubled the deficit that Justin Trudeau left behind, from $31 billion to $65 billion.
So what does the spring fiscal update mean for you? What does it tell us about the government's approach? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down. I was on the Globe and Mail website, Andrew, and I saw you had posted a reaction video, so I already have a sense of what you're going to say. But give me your thoughts on what you made of this document, which happily for me anyway, wasn't a mini budget. It was really an update.
Well, you asked what does it tell us? Not much. I mean, we're still waiting to find out what this government's economic vision is and how it differs from the old government that it supposedly replaced. What we do know is we're facing a growth crisis. We have been for many years in this country, where the government is now projecting growth of 1.7% per year, which is half what we grew even in the 80s, a third of what we grew in the 50s and 60s, and seems entirely unconcerned about this. We're facing a rising debt to GDP ratio, especially when you combine it with the provinces. The government is not only unconcerned about this, but presents a kind of a cack-handed way of explaining it, where if you subtract the CPP and the QPP, we have a debt to GDP ratio of only 10%. Well, you can't actually use pension funds to pay off your debts. It's a completely bogus comparison. But
that's amazing he brings that up. I've said that numerous times on the channel. They always use that to try to boost the numbers, but you can't, because that pension money isn't the government's money.
This is the thing. It's the same complacency. It's the same very top-down, government-directed, state-run pension investment funds and this kind of thing. There's really not any sort of new development policy and no sense of the seriousness of the situation we're in.
Well,
you can see Rosemary here pretty uncomfortable with his statements. It doesn't get any better. She keeps trying to smooth things over as this panel goes on. To
play devil's advocate, the skills training money and attempt to try to get more people into the trade seems significant in order to get the economy moving in the direction the government wants to. I mean, whether it works or not, I don't know. But I'll let you weigh in quickly, Andrew. Yeah.
I think that's worthwhile. I'm not saying that's bad policy, but that's not going to lift a $3.3 trillion economy off the floor.
Okay, Althea.
We're 3 for 3 now in weeks where Andrew Coyne has been on the money here. Unbelievable.
I'm more concerned with the things that weren't in the budget that I would have expected to see.
The update, yes.
Or perhaps I was looking for signals to see in which direction the government was going. So first of all, if we're going to make good on this NATO commitment, and I have no reason to doubt the government, but 3.5% of GDP is a lot of money. It's $87.5 billion. What are we spending on, and where is that money? Because there was none of it really described in this update. So I think that there are questions to be asked about that. I'm also quite concerned about the nods to social program. The government, the Prime Minister, we just heard Minister Champagne talking about being there for Canadians. The Prime Minister talks about childcare, talks about healthcare. They're letting the bilateral healthcare agreements lapse on mental health addiction, mental services, health addiction, long-term care, home care. On the child care, there is no new money for child care. They're letting an infrastructure fund lapse, which means that there's no capital funding for new child care spaces, which could mean, I've spoken to child advocates right after the budget ended, they're worried that this program basically will collapse if there's no new injection. It's certainly not going to get to the universality that we heard former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland talk about.
Or Patty Hyju just the other day. She said it last week as well. Oh, this $10 a day childcare. No, it's very limited who gets that program.
Pharmacare, there's not a mention of pharmacare. So all that money that the government has set aside, about $600 million that Nova Scotia wants, that Newfoundland and Labrador want, the government is not signaling an intention to do anything on that. And when you talk about building Canada strong, you know, how can you have a country where only 17% of Canadians are covered? And, you know, it's great if you have diabetes in the Yukon, you have access to medication. But if you have diabetes in Nova Scotia, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have your leg amputated because the government doesn't want to spend the money there. So I think there's going to be some interesting.
Ouch. That's ouch right there. And she's right. You can't just have one province get this funding and another one not. The whole program should be cut. The problem Carney's facing is he doesn't want to spend the money in those places because he would rather spend it on things towards Brookfield.
Conversations to be had in the next couple of months.
Aaron,
the direction the government is headed.
Aaron, what are your first thoughts?
I mean, I guess my first thought is the good news is they got through today without the finance minister resigning, which, as we all know, is not a given necessarily on update days anymore. That said, I think it's interesting that there's a return to this sort of fight over deficit spending. The Conservatives have really doubled down on that idea, you know, referring to credit card budgets. But I think to Althea's point, the other half of that is the government does say they're cutting back on operational spending. And it's not quite clear how all of that is going to play itself out. So I think the government could be facing sort of two opposing forces, right? One where they have to defend higher deficits and the other where they have to defend some of their spending choices. I think at least on the deficit spending, you know, they have to be banking on the idea that, to Andrew's point, that some of this spending is going to boost economic growth at least a bit, or that there's at least going to be, you know, tangible signs of progress you know, in the form of things actually being built. But I do think the sleeper issue here for them is how Canadians are going to react to some of the spending choices they're going to have to make.
I mean, if they really wanted to boost the economy, they would cut all the regulations, the carbon tax, all these things that are in the way of us building our nation. They put restrictions on us, and the average Canadian's just not paying attention. The Liberal government is not a serious governing party. They're essentially an organized cartel, sending our money to foreign aid consultants, Brookfield, places that benefit them and well-connected insiders, and the average Canadian just isn't paying attention. And this panel just keeps going, and it doesn't get any better.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Conservatives have a point, Andrew, about the deficit spending, but economists would say this is also not the time to cut back because of the instability in the world right now.
Well, there's short-term and long-term. The short-term fluctuations of the economy are really relatively minor compared to this long-term, decades-long decline we've seen. When you cannot grow faster than 1.5, 1.6% per year, you think it's a good year if it grows 1.7, you're not going to be able to finance the kind of major defense buildup we're seeing. You're certainly not going to be able to finance the aging of the population, which is primarily a problem for the provinces, but problems for the provinces ultimately also become the federal government's problems. Sure. So we have long-term fiscal needs that the only way we can address them is with faster growth, and we've got nothing in the pipeline to actually make the economy grow faster.
Did you see in the document, though, Althea, a recognition from the government that it is juggling a bunch of unknowns at the same time as it's trying to do these different things with the economy, and that's sort of the challenge?
I guess a little of column A and a little of column B. To Andrew's point, I do think we know what the government's direction is. They really believe that the investments that they're making, facilitating, and in some cases direct financial investments in these major projects is going to send Canada on a path where the economy goes stronger. I do think, though, and maybe this is a little bit to Aaron's point as well, that kind of the sleeper issue in this document is really kind of what happens with CUSMA. It's mentioned 6 times in the document, but it's not really mentioned as to, like, if this happens, then we have a plethora of programs that we're going to release. There's a little nod to a beefed up EI, but that's basically it. And, you know, the economy could look drastically different 6 months from now, depending on what happens. And with the president's ever escalating threats and the way he's recalculating tariffs, I do think there's a lot of uncertainty in this document, and it doesn't really address that part.
Is there anything reassuring for Canadians in the document, Aaron?
You know, look, I think the government is pretty sure that it's on the right path and believes that it's got a bunch of things moving forward that are going to show fruit. You know, the idea of the major projects moving forward and the idea that that's going to, you know, come to fruition sooner rather than later. I think, though, Althea's right that there's a lot of short-term instability, obviously, facing this government. Not only CUSMA, but, you know, the entire situation with Iran, which, let us not forget, has still not been resolved. So I think short-term, there's a ton of instability. And long-term, I'm interested to see where the discussion goes on fiscal policy writ large. I thought there was an interesting report from the C.D. Howe Institute a few weeks ago that said, hey, if you're going to finance all this big defense spending, you're going to have to look at not only slowing the growth of non-defense spending, but you might have to look at raising the GST by a couple points. Suffice it to say, no politician has leapt up to claim that idea yet. But I think that's, you know, sort of the long-term picture that I'm interested to see how that develops.
It's quite clear Carney wants to increase defense spending because there's some angle that this ties back into Brookfield. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought in Doug Guzman to head up that division, his buddy Doug Guzman.